In the heart of the Roman Empire, a god on earth did not just take a male lover, he took one as his wife in a public ceremony, with the emperor himself playing the part of the bride. This was a world where another ruler, consumed by a love so absolute, defied every tradition not by marrying his beloved boy, but by commanding the entire world to worship him as a new god. These were not secret affairs hidden in the shadows of the palace. They were public spectacles of power, so extreme they could redefine the meaning of marriage, gender, and even divinity itself, forcing one to ask what a boy had to be to become an empress and what he had to do to become a god. Fact 1. Roman masculinity was a fortress built on a single, brutal rule. It was a principle so deeply ingrained in the fabric of their world that it defined not just a man's honor, but his very existence as a citizen, a warrior, and a master of the known world. This was the law of virtus, a word we translate as virtue, but to them it meant something far more primal: manliness, courage, and above all, dominance. To be a Roman man was to be the penetrator, the one who takes, the one who stands unbent. The object of this dominance was of secondary importance. A wife, a slave girl captured in Gaul, a tavern boy from Cyriathes were all acceptable outlets for a citizen's desires, different vessels for the same assertion of power. Imagine a senator, his toga immaculate, walking through the steamy haze of the baths. The air is thick with the scent of oils and the low murmur of powerful men. He is a pillar of the state, a man who commands legions and writes laws. His power is absolute, not just in the forum, but in his home, over his property, and over every soul who is not, like him, a free-born Roman male. His gaze could fall upon anyone of lesser status, and the transaction was understood without a word. It was the natural order. But what if the roles were reversed? What if that senator, that symbol of Roman strength, was the one who submitted? This was the unspeakable terror, the social poison for which there was no antidote. To willingly be penetrated was to commit civic suicide. It was to become effeminate, to be branded a synonitus, a man who had forfeited his right to be called a man at all. He would lose his right to vote, to speak in court, to hold office, to command soldiers. He became a ghost, a walking disgrace whose very presence was an offense to the gods and the state. His status as a master would instantly and irrevocably shatter, leaving him lower than the lowest slave. This was the one unbreakable rule, the bedrock of their entire social pyramid. And it is the key that unlocks everything that is to follow, because the Romans were about to find a man, an emperor, who would not just break this rule, but set it on fire for the entire world to see. Fact 2. The Romans had no official word for a man who was kept as a lover. While a female companion, the concubina, held a recognized, if inferior, social and legal status, her male counterpart existed only in the shadows of language, defined not by law but by the cutting precision of informal labels. He was a ghost in the legal system, a being whose very existence was an acknowledgement of a master's power. The most common of these terms was puer delicatus, the delicate boy. The name itself evokes a certain cultivated fragility, a being designed for aesthetic pleasure. These were not mere bedwarmers, they were living ornaments, paraded at dinner parties to signal the master's immense wealth and refined taste. Imagine a dimly lit room in a villa on the Palatine Hill, the air heavy with incense and roasting meat. The master reclines while his puer delicatus, a Greek youth with carefully curled hair, recites verses from Homer in a soft, melodic voice. He is dressed in fine dyed linen, his skin glowing with scented oil. To the guests, he is a testament to the master's reach and resources, an object of beauty no different from the silver goblets or the intricate mosaics on the floor. His intelligence and charm are part of the product. But was this boy, so treasured and displayed, seen as a person, or was he merely a beautiful mask worn by his owner? Herein lies the cruel deception. Another term, concubines, the direct masculine form, was used more bluntly, stripping away the poetic pretense. Then there was catamitis, a word spat with contempt, a slur that reduced the boy to his purely sexual function, forever branding him with the shame of the submissive role. The language held him in a cage of contradiction. He could be a cherished companion one moment and a despised object the next. His value was as fleeting as his youth, entirely dependent on the whims of the man who owned him, soul and body. This careful, deliberate use of language was a tool of control, a way to possess a person completely by defining the very limits of their existence. And this system of turning human beings into precious objects was not just a private habit of the rich, it was about to become an industry. Fact 3. The delicate boy was far more than a private indulgence. He was a weapon in the silent, ruthless wars of social status. His primary function was not performed in the bedroom, but in the brilliant, lamp-lit theater of the Roman dinner party. Here, amidst the powerful and the privileged, the puer delicatus was the ultimate testament to his master's wealth, intellect, and exquisite taste. The selection process was as rigorous as that for a champion racehorse. Mere beauty was not enough. The most sought-after boys were those of Greek or Eastern origin, possessing an education that shamed many of their Roman masters. They were expected to be walking libraries of verse, able to debate philosophy, and skilled with instruments like the lyre or the cithara. Imagine the scene. A dozen of Rome's most influential men recline on couches, their senses swimming in a sea of wine, spiced food, and perfumed air. At the center of it all, a single youth stands, his voice the only sound, weaving tales of gods and heroes in their original Greek. He is not just entertainment, he is a message. His presence tells every guest that his master is a man of such immense means and sophistication that he can afford to own not just a body, but a mind. But how was such a perfect cultural artifact acquired? The scene shifts from the soft light of the party to the harsh, unforgiving glare of the slave market. Here, the boy was not a poet but a product, stripped and prodded, his teeth inspected, his limbs measured. His intellect was just another feature to be haggled over, his memory and wit assigned a price in cold, hard sesterces. This jarring contrast reveals the cold heart of the entire institution. The boy's elevated status was a complete fiction, a beautiful costume loaned to him by his owner. He was a mirror, reflecting a glory that was never his own, and that reflection could be shattered at any moment. This transformation from chattel to centerpiece was the most profound role reversal of all, a daily reminder that his life was a performance directed by another. The Romans perfected this art of using human beings as social signals, but they were merely amateurs compared to what was to come. The emperors were watching, and they would soon begin to practice this art on a scale that would dwarf the ambitions of any senator. Fact 4. Rome did have a law against certain homosexual acts, but its true target reveals a chilling obsession. The existence of this law, the lex scantinia, feels like a familiar anchor of morality in a sea of decadent behavior. It stands as a testament to the fact that even the Romans had their limits, a line they would not cross. But a closer look at this ancient statute reveals that the line was not drawn to protect a universal moral code, but to guard the most precious commodity in the entire empire, the sanctity of the Roman citizen. The law did not forbid a man from loving another man. It did not concern itself with the private affairs of the powerful. Its focus was terrifyingly specific. It criminalized the stuprum, the illicit sexual violation of a pure ingenuous, a freeborn boy of citizen status. Imagine two youths standing side by side, identical in age and appearance. One is the son of a senator, the other a captured Greek slave. In the eyes of the law, one is a future soldier, a potential statesman, a vessel of Roman destiny whose physical integrity is a concern of the state itself. The other is furniture that breathes. This was the pattern interrupt at the heart of Roman justice. The lex scantinia did not protect children, it protected citizens. It implicitly sanctioned the use of the slave boy by making no mention of him. His body was legally invisible, his suffering irrelevant. How could a society build its foundations on such a deep and deliberate contradiction? The law created an unbridgeable chasm, a world where the legal status of your father determined whether your body was a sacred temple or a common playground. This was not a system of morality, it was a system of caste. A citizen's son was protected because he was an investment in the future of Rome. The slave boy was not. This stark legal reality underscores the terrifying totality of a master's power, a power that rendered his property invisible to the law. But while the law protected the sons of Rome from other citizens, it was utterly silent on the one man who stood above the law, the man for whom all of Rome was property. Fact 5. The man who stood above the law decided to shatter the very foundation upon which it was built. The Emperor Nero, the living god and master of the Roman world, orchestrated a public ceremony that was not just an act of rebellion, but an act of profound self-annihilation in the eyes of his people. He chose to get married, but in this wedding he would not be the groom. Imagine a procession moving through the palace at dusk, the air thick with the cloying scent of lilies and sacrificial smoke. The scene is draped in tradition. Priests chant solemn vows, attendants carry torches that cast long, flickering shadows on marble walls. This is the sacred ritual of a Roman marriage, an institution designed to forge alliances and secure bloodlines. At its center stands a figure veiled in the flammeum, the traditional flame-colored veil of a Roman bride, a symbol of modesty and purity. But as the figure moves into the light, a collective gasp freezes the air. The face beneath the veil is not that of a noblewoman, it is the unmistakable face of the emperor. The groom, waiting at the altar, is not a foreign king or a Roman aristocrat. He is Pythagoras, one of Nero's own freedmen, a man who was once, legally, his property. In a single, horrifying moment of public theater, the world has been turned upside down. The emperor, the symbol of absolute dominance, has willingly taken the role of the submissive. The master has become the bride of his former slave. What drove him to such an act? Was it a symptom of a mind spiraling into madness, or a calculated political statement designed to show the elite that he was bound by none of their rules, not even the most sacred one? The senators who watched their faces, masks of stone-cold fury, saw it as the ultimate degradation, a perversion that defiled the office of emperor and the soul of Rome itself. They believed they were witnessing the absolute bottom, the most obscene spectacle a Roman could ever endure. They thought the story of imperial depravity had reached its final, shocking chapter. They were wrong. This was only the beginning. Fact 6. The emperor's blasphemy was not a singular event. It was a prelude to an act of creation. After the death of his beloved wife, Poppaea, Nero was consumed by a grief that twisted into a grotesque obsession. He launched a search not for a new wife, but for a living echo of his dead one. He found it in a boy named Sporus, whose delicate features were said to be a near-perfect mirror of the departed empress. But for Nero, a simple resemblance was not enough. He did not want a boy who looked like his wife. He wanted his wife back, in a new form of his own making. And so, he commanded an act that stood outside the bounds of nature and law. He had Sporus castrated. Imagine the cold finality of that moment, the violent severing of a boy's future, the surgical destruction of his identity, all to satisfy an emperor's whim. This was not just a violation, it was a remaking. The boy Sporus died on that physician's table, and something else was born. Nero then staged another wedding, but this one was different. This time, Nero was the groom. He took Sporus, now a eunuch, as his bride. He had the boy dressed in the lavish regalia of the empresses of Rome, adorned with jewels and draped in imperial purple. He gave him the name Sabina and demanded that the entire court, the Senate, and the people of Rome address this mutilated youth as their Augusta, their empress. What was this? A macabre monument to a dead love? Or was it the ultimate display of power? The power not just to rule men, but to unmake them and rebuild them in any image the master desired. Sporus became a walking phantom in the palace, a boy forced to be a woman, a slave forced to be a ruler, his every breath a testament to the absolute and terrifying scope of Nero's will. He was a living statue, sculpted by the emperor's madness. Nero had shown the world that an emperor's power could mutilate and mock the very idea of love. But another emperor would soon arise to demonstrate that his power could also elevate it to the heavens, transforming a mortal boy not into a fleeting empress, but into an eternal god. Fact 7. Not all imperial obsessions were forged in cruelty. One was born from a love that would redraw the maps of both heaven and earth. After the monstrous theater of Nero, the Roman world saw the rise of a different kind of emperor. Hadrian was a scholar, a soldier, a restless traveler obsessed with the vastness of his domain. And by his side on these epic journeys was a youth from Bithynia in Greece, a boy named Antinous. This was not the relationship of a master and a hidden-away plaything. This was a bond lived out in the open, under the gaze of the entire world. Imagine them together, two figures against the monumental backdrop of the empire. See them walking through the ruins of Troy, discussing the heroes of old. Picture them in Athens, debating with philosophers in the shadow of the Acropolis. Feel the dry heat as they lead a hunting party across the plains of Libya, the emperor and his cherished companion sharing the thrill of the chase. Antinous was not a secret. He was a constant presence. He was there in the official processions, in the military camps, at the religious festivals. He was a part of the imperial image. This public visibility was the ultimate pattern interrupt. It elevated Antinous from the status of a simple concubiness to something far more significant, something closer to a consort. The status shift was profound. He was not a slave performing for guests at a dinner party. He was a partner witnessing the governance of the world. But could a relationship born from such an extreme imbalance of power ever be one of genuine reciprocal love? Or was Antinous simply the most beautiful exhibit in Hadrian's collection of Greek art and culture, his cage merely larger and more gilded than those of others? As they journeyed into the ancient and mystical land of Egypt, their bond seemed to deepen, reaching a level of intimacy few could comprehend. They sailed down the timeless, placid waters of the Nile, surrounded by the silent monuments of forgotten gods, two souls seemingly at the center of their own perfect universe. They believed they were sailing toward the future, but they were drifting toward a fate that would drown a boy and break an emperor. Fact 8. The death of a single boy on a forgotten stretch of the Nile triggered a grief so monumental it created a new god. The drowning of Antinous broke something inside Emperor Hadrian. The stoic mask of the Roman ruler shattered, and what lay beneath horrified the court. This was not the dignified, controlled mourning of a statesman. It was a raw, primal agony. Ancient historians tell us he wept, like a woman, a damning accusation for a Roman man, let alone an emperor. Imagine the most powerful man on earth, his robes disheveled, his beard untrimmed in a sign of deep sorrow, rendered powerless by a memory. The business of the empire ground to a halt as its master lost himself in a haze of grief. But from this despair, an unprecedented act of creation was born. Hadrian would not let Antinous fade into the underworld. He would remake the heavens themselves to keep him. First, he commanded that on the very spot where his beloved had drowned, a new city would rise from the sand. It would be called Antinopolis, a magnificent testament of stone and marble, a city dedicated to a single, cherished soul. Then came the ultimate decree, an act that sent shockwaves from Britain to Syria. Hadrian declared that Antinous was a god. This was the most profound status shift imaginable. The boy from Bithynia, the emperor's companion, was now to be worshipped alongside Jupiter and Osiris. Was this the desperate act of a broken heart, a man trying to build a staircase to a soul he could not live without? Or was it the ultimate flex of imperial power, a man demonstrating his will was so absolute he could mint new deities as easily as new coins? Cults were established, temples were built, and priests were ordained, all in service to the new god, Antinous. Statues bearing his melancholy face, more than of any other figure from that era except the emperors themselves, became a common sight across the empire. Hadrian had used his power not to conquer lands, but to conquer death itself. He had proven that an emperor's love could turn a mortal into a god, immortalizing him in stone and starlight. But for every one Antinous who ascended to divinity, thousands of other boys remained trapped in a much harsher reality, a reality not of palaces and temples, but of cold, hard commerce. Fact 9. Behind every deified lover and imperial bride stood a vast and brutal marketplace. The stories of Nero and Hadrian, with all their horror and grandeur, were the exceptions, the glittering peaks of a colossal mountain of human commerce. For every one Antinous, there were thousands of unnamed boys whose lives were not poems, but simple, cruel transactions. To understand their reality, one must leave the gilded palaces and descend into the stench and noise of the Roman slave market. Imagine a raised wooden platform under a harsh sun. Here, human beings are displayed like livestock. The air is thick with the smell of sweat and fear. An auctioneer, his voice a bored monotone, describes his wares not as children, but as products. He speaks of their origin, their level of education, their physical attributes, and their skills. Potential buyers, wealthy men with cold eyes, step forward to inspect the goods. They force open mouths to check teeth, run hands over limbs to feel for muscle, and turn bodies around to look for scars or imperfections. This was the raw, unfiltered truth. Before a boy could become a puer delicatus, he was just a commodity with a price tag. The wealthiest Romans did not just own one, they collected them. They boasted of their grex exsolatorum, their flock of catamites, a term that reduces a group of human beings to a herd of animals. Owning dozens of these boys was the ultimate display of conspicuous consumption, a living inventory of a master's power. But what happened to the boys deemed flawed, the ones who didn't sell? And what was the fate of the prized possessions when their beauty inevitably faded, when a new, younger face caught their master's eye? They could be sold again, passed down to a less discerning owner, or sent to the mines or the galleys, their brief moment of luxurious servitude ending in a life of hard labor and misery. This was the ultimate status reversal, a journey from a person to a product, and then, finally, to trash. This marketplace of human flesh, this entire system of dominance and submission, seemed as eternal and unshakable as Rome itself. But a new faith was gathering strength in the shadows of the empire, a faith with a radically different God, and a new set of rules that would not merely regulate this world, but seek to burn it to the ground. Fact 10. The world of the emperors and their boy lovers did not simply fade away, it was scoured from history by a revolution in human thought. The entire complex structure, built on the bedrock of dominance and submission, was not reformed but condemned. To understand its end is to understand just how alien its values truly were. This was a world that saw no contradiction in a man loving his wife while owning a flock of boys as human decoration. A world where the law existed not to protect the innocent, but to protect the integrity of a citizen's power. It was a reality that could celebrate the transformation of a boy into a god as an act of supreme love, while simultaneously justifying the sale of another on an auction block like a piece of pottery. We have seen an emperor, Nero, put on a bride's veil, inverting the natural order in a shocking display of absolute power. We have seen him take it further, mutilating a boy, Sporus, to sculpt him into the horrifying likeness of a dead empress. And we have seen another emperor, Hadrian, crippled by a grief so profound that he ripped a hole in heaven to place his beloved Antinous among the stars. These are not just stories of personal desire, they are parables of a system where a man's worth was measured by his capacity to dominate, and a boy's life was defined by his master's whim. But as this world reached its zenith of terrible, beautiful contradictions, a new faith grew. Christianity offered a radically different vision, one where humility was a virtue, not a weakness, and chastity was a path to God. The proud, penetrating Roman citizen, the very model of virtus, was recast as the unrepentant sinner. This new morality did not care if a boy was a citizen or a slave, it cared about his immortal soul. The entire Roman sexual universe, a public theater of power and status, was bulldozed and replaced by a private world of personal conscience and sin. Their world of dominance, of living gods and human property, did not just fall, it was erased, leaving behind only whispers and ruins, a shocking and alien testament to a truth we have forgotten, that even the most fundamental ideas of love, power, and what it means to be human are not eternal. Fact 10. The world of the emperors and their boy lovers did not simply fade away, it was scoured from history by a revolution in human thought. The entire complex structure, built on the bedrock of dominance and submission, was not reformed but condemned. To understand its end is to understand just how alien its values truly were. This was a world that saw no contradiction in a man loving his wife while owning a flock of boys as human decoration. A world where the law existed not to protect the innocent, but to protect the integrity of a citizen's power. It was a reality that could celebrate the transformation of a boy into a god as an act of supreme love, while simultaneously justifying the sale of another on an auction block like a piece of pottery. We have seen an emperor, Nero, put on a bride's veil, inverting the natural order in a shocking display of absolute power. We have seen him take it further, mutilating a boy, Sporus, to sculpt him into the horrifying likeness of a dead empress. And we have seen another emperor, Hadrian, crippled by a grief so profound that he ripped a hole in heaven to place his beloved Antinous among the stars. These are not just stories of personal desire, they are parables of a system where a man's worth was measured by his capacity to dominate, and a boy's life was defined by his master's whim. But as this world reached its zenith of terrible, beautiful contradictions, a new faith grew. Christianity offered a radically different vision, one where humility was a virtue, not a weakness, and chastity was a path to God. The proud, penetrating Roman citizen, the very model of virtus, was recast as the unrepentant sinner. This new morality did not care if a boy was a citizen or a slave. It cared about his immortal soul. The entire Roman sexual universe, a public theater of power and status, was bulldozed and replaced by a private world of personal conscience and sin. Their world of dominance, of living gods and human property, did not just fall. It was erased, leaving behind only whispers and ruins, a shocking and alien testament to a truth we have forgotten, that even the most fundamental ideas of love, power, and what it means to be human are not eternal.